Hi everyone, I'm Will Lennon, the Chief Operating Officer at Imbibe. I'm excited to share with you today some of our findings around the clean label marketplace with a focus on the cost and supply chain challenges that exist for companies entering this space. In general terms, we are dealing with a market that is still immature. What that means is that pricing is not equilibrated, information is not transparent, and supply can be inconsistent. These are obviously large challenges, but the good news is that they can be overcome, but it just requires a great focus on planning and communication, both internally with team members and externally with vendors. Before we get into the presentation on the biggest cost considerations in implementing clean label strategies, I'll just tell you a little bit about Imbibe to give you some context for the information that I'll be presenting. Imbibe is a beverage development company right outside of Chicago. We formulate all different types of beverages by designing the custom ingredients and custom flavors that go into the beverages we develop. We work on over 300 projects a year in a lot of different applications for many different types of clients, both in food service and in retail. We've seen firsthand a tremendous shift in the demand for products with cleaner labels. Over the past few years in my role as the Chief Operating Officer at Imbibe, I have been involved in the commercialization of hundreds of products that had to adhere in some way to a clean label guidance. Through each project, our team became more sophisticated and adept at accommodating the clean label requirements. At Imbibe, we work on all beverage formats: liquid water enhancers, powdered beverages, frozen, dispensed, bag-in-the-box, syrups, and it cuts across all different categories between juices, coffee, tea, carbonated soft drinks, energy drinks, protein drinks, cocktail mixers. And we've developed clean label beverages across all these categories. We develop products to be sold in convenience stores, quick service, fast casual restaurants, retail, private label, all different channels. Throughout the presentation, I'll give examples of different beverages and formats that we have worked on at Imbibe, especially in terms of helping clients create cleaner ingredient statements. In some cases, we launched a new product, and in other cases, we made a change to an existing product. And just looking at the agenda for the discussion at a high level, we'll first talk about some clean label cost considerations in different categories, such as raw ingredients, capacity, new suppliers and new ingredients, and then an area around unforeseeable costs, what we're calling the hashtag effect in California. Then we'll focus a little bit more about what it takes to invest in clean label internally at your company. We'll deal with some conclusions and takeaways, and I'll discuss some of the most important cost considerations to be aware of in order to effectively implement the clean label changes to the supply chain. I'll give you some real-world examples of cost implications of using cleaner raw ingredients and capacity and working with new suppliers. And in the end, we'll talk about some of the less commonly considered costs and the main nuggets you should bring back to your team, especially if they're interested in understanding clean label from a supply chain standpoint. Let's dive into some of the more specific costs associated with going clean label. First of all, let's just take a moment and look at this table. Across the top, you'll see the ingredient category, artificial ingredients, clean label alternatives, and cost implications, and down the y-axis, are examples of each. This table illustrates the most important popular ingredient categories in the clean label movement. It's not totally comprehensive, but it should give you a good perspective on what we're talking about. The second column includes some of the increasingly common blacklisted ingredients as we see brands move away from artificial ingredients. The next column to the right lists the cost implications, and let's dive into the sweeteners. If you look here, artificial sweeteners are inexpensive in general, and as a result, there's a significant cost increase in moving to natural sweeteners. Substituting natural sweeteners for artificial sweeteners is not a mere swap out. It requires reformulation. Natural sweeteners are going to impart different flavor profiles and may need to be addressed with other flavor maskers or modulation technology. So it is a significant undertaking. And as you go across the table, you'll see we can look at stevia, monk fruit. Those are just some clean label alternatives to the artificial sweeteners. And as you can see, the cost implications are substantial. You can go from $18 to $85 a kilo to $132 a kilo, and even we've seen more than that as well. So all this must be taken into considerations. And looking at preservatives, you know, the standard preservatives we would see in the marketplace are sodium benzoate, potassium sorbate, and you're going to need to employ another method to maintain a shelf-stable product or move to a refrigerated supply chain. In order to do so, your whole formula is going to have to change to be compatible. You'd have to use hot fill. You'd have to use aseptic processing and packaging, or as I mentioned, the refrigerated supply chain. And the implications for that are higher minimum order quantities. If you pack at some of the aseptic facilities, they have very, very substantial minimum order quantities. And even now at many of the hot fill plants, you'll have high minimum order quantities and sometimes limited availability. So all of this needs to be considered as you continue in your project. In addition to that, if you look at the cost of the packaging, just looking at the bottle costs, if you look at a cold fill PET bottle, that could range from 10 to 15 cents. A hot fill can go up to 20 cents, and aseptic can go up to 25 cents a bottle. So that's literally just on the packaging side. So again, you need to be thinking about all of this as you're selecting which direction you're going to take. On the color side, here are some of the standard colors you're familiar with, I'm sure. Red 40, yellow 5, blue 2. These are standard flavors. And now as we move to the clean label alternative, you have carotenoids, you know, beet juice, berry extracts, paprika, turmeric, all of these different types of clean label alternatives. And as you can see, the cost implications are similar, where they go up substantially from $5 a gallon to $26 a gallon. Not only that, but as you use the natural colors, a lot of times you'll need to use a lot more color than you may have used previously because they don't go as far and they degrade more quickly. And so you have to think about that. You also have to think about considering shelf life studies and seeing how long the natural colors will last in your product. We've had a lot of customers that have talked about moving to natural colors, but once they see their product on the shelf after a few months where the colors have degraded, they've reconsidered. And so the technology will continue to improve for a lot of these colors, but for right now, these are the things you have to deal with. And you have to make sure you do bottle tests to make sure you understand how light can affect the colors over time. And so all of that has to be considered. You'll definitely need a regulatory expert to help figure out the labeling details for all of these new ingredients. The good news is these added costs will likely be worth it, because according to the Ingredient Communications study recently, they found that as many as 73% of consumers are happy to pay a higher retail price for a food or drink product made with ingredients that they recognize and trust. So the good news is there is payback, hopefully, on a lot of these important decisions that you'll be making. The next slide I wanted to focus on is a case study that we recently worked on. We're working with a customer who wanted a clean label powdered beverage. They were also interested in including a particular berry powder on their label. In working on sourcing this berry powder, we looked at multiple vendors, but the cost of the berry combined with the cost of many of the clean label proteins that were involved in the beverage made the overall cost of the product quite prohibitive. We decided to get a little creative and worked with one of the berry powder manufacturers to create a blend of the powder. Half was freeze-dried powder and half became what's called drum-dried berry powder. And where the cost of the regular berry powder was originally about $10 a pound, we were able to cut it back all the way down to almost $5 a pound, half the cost, and allow the customer to keep the berry on the label as they had requested. Obviously, this also required additional formulation adjustments, which our product applications team were able to make. But the key point is that sometimes you need to get creative and work with your suppliers to see if adjustments can be made to their products to keep within your requirements. The other important point is that you need to approach your product development with a hierarchy of needs. In this case, the berry powder and cost were the critical components and the critical needs, and the customer was willing to compromise a bit on the texture of the product, which allowed us to come up with this solution. Additionally, one of the challenges we always face on the clean label side is what exactly do you mean when you say you want your product to be clean? Clean label can mean many different things. You could be talking about non-GMO, you could be talking about organic, you can be talking about clean protein and natural colors. As a best practice, we have a very detailed project briefs with checklists of all clean label requirements to make sure that we are clear early on in the project as to what the hierarchy of needs are and what the specific clean label requirements are. So in thinking about takeaways from this case studies, just remember, press your suppliers to work with you. Go back to your suppliers and figure out blends or similar ingredient substitutions. Come in knowing the hierarchy of needs. You have to decide what the trade-offs are going to be and what you're comfortable with. You're probably not going to be able to get everything that you're looking for without added expense. Is the cost the most important thing? Is the labeling on the ingredient statements the most important? Is an additional ingredient acceptable if the ingredient statement also includes the primary ingredient? All very important questions. And as you come prepared to these discussions, obviously can help make the product development process go much smoother. Additionally, on the raw material side, another large challenge that we deal with is that currently demand is really outstripping supply in the market for many ingredients. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is not yet a mature marketplace. We see this as an issue with some of the clean proteins like pea protein, brown rice protein, and now even mushroom proteins. Large customers are moving into the market with huge demand, but the suppliers are not ready. Many suppliers are in the process of building new facilities to accommodate increased demand, but this can take 1 to 2 years before the facilities will be ready. And even then, in many cases, that supply is already spoken for. What this also means is that suppliers are now requiring much more rigor around supply agreements. Where many commodity products are on the floor and in stock, supply for clean label ingredients will require stocking agreements where you'll have to agree to a certain amount of supply even before you know if your product will sell. It's just the reality of this new marketplace. Even while supply chain organizations within companies are becoming more sophisticated due to capacity issues, companies are having to place large bets on product launches without having the assurance that they will be successful. And obviously this could lead to significant obsolescence. And so it just makes sense to spend extra time planning up front for these capacity challenges. In reality, it's not just supply for the product that's a challenge, but it's also supply for line time for certain types of formats. As I mentioned before, with the shift away from preservatives, the demand for hot fill has increased significantly. Capacity is a big challenge. These are very important items that you must consider when launching your product, or you'll not be able to get it produced. And just looking at some of the, we're calling capacity culprits, you can look at some of these large behemoth companies that have really jumped on the clean label bandwagon. Here are just a few examples of some of the brands that have made clean label commitments. For example, Mondelez plans to remove artificial colors and flavors from their package brands by 2020. Kellogg is committed to removing artificial colors and flavors from many branded cereals by 2018. Caribou is the first coffee chain to pledge to go 100% clean, which means no artificial colors, flavors, sweeteners, preservatives, MSG, or high fructose corn syrup by 2018. If these huge companies cannibalize line time and manufacturing facilities, what does it mean for the smaller, on-trend, innovative, and entrepreneurial brands? Are they going to be able to get the time and packaging that they want? And more than that, are they going to be able to have access to the ingredients they need? With new ingredients also come new suppliers and new opportunities, but also potentially a lot of risks. Some of the risks and costs aren't always obvious, but I'll highlight some of them and how we manage a capacity issue with a customer of ours on the next slide. In this example, we worked with a customer who was launching a beverage that required a significant amount of brown rice protein, calling this the case of the brown rice protein. But because of the immaturity of this market, it wasn't an easy ingredient to source. We found a solution, an ingredient from China that had a 90 to 120-day lead time. There weren't really other options for this ingredient because our customer needed such a large quantity. A supplier was actually building another facility to accommodate this need, which of course adds time to this entire process. It usually takes at least a year to build a new facility, if not more. There are several costs associated with insufficient capacity. One that you might not really think about is that is significant is the cost of your reputation with your customers. Your customers aren't always going to be open to hearing about delays in procurement, even though some of these suppliers aren't necessarily ready for the demand that these global giants are placing on them. You have to be careful about what you're promising and keeping everyone apprised of the risks. They have to ask the involved parties if they're ready to launch a product that doesn't have a guaranteed supply chain with all the volume they might need or expect. This is a new dynamic that you haven't really dealt with before, at least we haven't for many, many years. And so you have to be careful about how your reputation will be affected if you can't give your customers what they're asking for. Further, another cost of this unstructured supply chain is the time spent on sourcing more ingredients, backup ingredients, suppliers that can offer enough of an ingredient, which definitely isn't a given in this marketplace. You need to become a better forecaster than your customer so you can quickly adapt to increased demand. One delayed ingredient can throw off the entire product launch schedule. As takeaways, some of the costs associated with the lack of capacity or other capacity issues are unquantifiable. Things like the cost of your reputation and being able to meet the needs of your customers, the cost of launching a product in an uncertain climate. If it takes off and you can't get enough ingredients for the product, then what? The cost of developing alternative ingredients with ingredients that are available, all these costs need to be considered. This is why it's critical to bring your operations team on early so you can really start figuring out the timing and volume of the ingredients needed. I always encourage our operations team to get involved in the project as early as possible so we can account for any unforeseen delays in product commercialization. At Imbibe, we specifically have a dedicated staff to make sure certifications check out, supply chain is in place, and that our customers' expectations in terms of time and money are managed. Next, another consideration that should be thought of is that many of these suppliers that you're dealing with are newer suppliers and smaller suppliers, and they need to be pressed to deliver appropriate documentation. These suppliers also need to be adequately vetted. You have to make time to visit them. You have to check out their legitimacy to ensure that you're comfortable banking your future product launches on them. We had an example where finding organic stevia for us was a long and tedious path. We had ingredients from China that needed to be vetted and suppliers pressed for documentation much more than the US-based suppliers. This supplier from China claimed that it was an organic stevia because the stevia leaf was organic. But the solvent used for extraction, which is alcohol, wasn't organic because they don't have organic alcohol in China. If the solvent isn't organic, then the end product isn't organic. This is something that really needs to be looked into and addressed, and oftentimes suppliers should be able to secure this paperwork for you, but you need to review it and you need to look at it carefully. We had another example with an ethyl alcohol that we were using where a supplier said it was non-GMO, but really it was actually GMO-free, which are two different things. Another example where a product didn't have caramel color listed on the ingredient statement, even though we were able to get the formulas, there was caramel color in it. They weren't familiar with the labeling requirements and thought because they considered caramel color natural, it didn't have to be included. Obviously, these are very sophisticated questions, and you need regulatory staff to help you evaluate. The nascent nature of this market also means that there isn't a lot of transparency in terms of the pricing of these ingredients. If there's a set price for an ingredient, because there aren't a lot of suppliers, a lot of times there's going to be a premium placed on that ingredient. When working with rare or new ingredients, it's hard to know the price, and the market isn't perfectly competitive because it's so new. We've encountered this lack of visibility and transparency only when we identified an alternate source for an ingredient we needed. This new ingredient was priced significantly lower than the price we were quoted from the first supplier, and we were able to recognize that a combination of the lack of visibility and lack of understanding of the value contributes to ingredients being overpriced. It's hard to price shop, and just because you're getting a cheaper price doesn't mean much if they can't supply the volume of the product or if it's an inferior ingredient. Also, if there's no standard of identity, it's important for you to do due diligence to make sure you're getting the ingredient that you think you are. And finally, vetting and working with newer suppliers can contribute to the overall cost of going clean label. They're of course going to add time and possibly money depending on how much reformulation needs to occur or additional documentation that may be required. And last in this category is what we're calling the unforeseeable costs, the hashtag effects in specifically California. Since clean label is such an important trend and value among today's consumers, there are constantly new ingredients coming under scrutiny, sometimes based on real data and sometimes based on consumer perception, and certain individuals or groups making a lot of noise. They use the internet as their megaphone, and over the years, the online sensationalism around certain ingredients has caused major companies to reformulate as a result of all the negative press online. Internet sensationalism in California both are contributors to how quickly the perception of an ingredient can shift. Demonizing ingredients at a ridiculous pace adds a cost to brands and developers. You have to replace ingredients because something that once was inconsequential suddenly isn't. And looking at the state of California, there's obviously a huge list of Prop 65 ingredients that have to be listed, or you have to label, or label in the store. In the last few years, we've had some significant issues with this in terms of 4-MeI and caramel that had to be labeled. And then more recently, within the last month or so, they launched furfural alcohol is now on the Prop 65 list. And furfural alcohol is a natural byproduct of sugar and water caramelizing, and it's in colas. And it's now on the Prop 65 list, but yet there hasn't been any guidance for the limitations. But all this means is that you now need to go through all of your products to make sure that you don't have furfural alcohol, and if you do have furfural alcohol, that you're actually labeling appropriately. Other examples of this are carrageenan. If you look at, Wellness Mama, one of those big blogs at 27,000 followers on Twitter, talked about the demonization of carrageenan in June 2017. Brands like Califia Farms and So Delicious have now put on carrageenan-free claims because of the controversy and rhetoric available online. Gatorade removed BVO. There's a lot of literature and some consumer skepticism on BVO, brominated vegetable oil, which is a synthetic chemical that is created when vegetable oil is bonded to the element bromine. There have been a few sensationalized cases of ailments that can arise from elevated levels of bromine found in the body. Starbucks is changing the formulation for their pumpkin spice latte. So you're going to have to make a decision on whether or not it's worth it for your brand to include these ingredients or to deal with them accordingly. The ingredient landscape and perception around certain ingredients is constantly changing, so our regulatory team is focused on being able to quickly adapt. With furfural alcohol, we had to go through all our formulas and reformulate in many cases. Next, let's talk about some of the costs that aren't always top of mind as we're thinking about investing in Clean Label and the cost of Clean Label. And these are the costs associated with additional resources and staff. If you think about a few different categories that will have to be increased given this new environment, you have the regulatory team, and that's to account for all this additional paperwork and the correct labeling on packaging. We've actually invested in strategic sourcing specialists that help manage our procurement by identifying the best source of increasingly specific ingredients and thinking about other opportunities to swap out new ingredients or backup suppliers. You need someone focused on this, at least one, maybe more people focusing on finding new ingredients and finding alternatives. And then, of course, there's the cost of the R&D. Replacing an ingredient like sucralose with stevia is going to require more iterations. Stevia doesn't function the same way in the product as sucralose, and these type of issues had led us to expand our R&D team to handle the additions, iterations, and development work. Also, vetting of the best suppliers. There are a lot of different versions of some of these ingredients on the market. Finding out which ingredient is the best is critical and requires the attention of multiple staff members. These ingredient companies are constantly launching new ingredients, so to stay competitive, you have to be on top of new releases and how they function in your product in order to be competitive from a price and taste standpoint. We've had to add several positions in the past year to accommodate this shift and increase demand for Clean Label ingredients. Next, although it's an added expense, you need to conduct consumer testing, not only on the purchase intent of having a cleaner label product, but also on the sensory testing once the product formula is complete. What consumers say they want and what they actually purchase are two different things. Solid consumer testing can help inform you if you should launch a product, and conducting this testing up front is much less expensive than launching a product. As an example, the stevia version of vitamin water was so unpopular that the company had to switch it back to the full-calorie fructose version because consumers were so unhappy with the taste. You need to determine your priorities within Clean Label because each one has a cost associated with it, and you may not be able to afford the Cadillac. There are likely some things that are essential. Maybe it's natural sweeteners, and others like natural color may be nice to haves. Many people say they want Clean Label, but will become gun shy when the taste is actually different than what they had anticipated and what they had experienced before. Okay, in conclusion, we have the good, the not as good, and the future. The good news is that we've come a long way in the right direction. There are many more suppliers that can provide clean label ingredients than there were even 5 years ago. For example, ADM hadn't even begun offering non-GMO ingredients before they wouldn't. Suppliers are much more responsive to the heavy documentation that is required. Greater loyalty is when you find vendors that will be supportive and have the infrastructure to assist with all clean label requirements. The marketplace is changing in terms of clean label ingredients from a supply chain development and regulatory standpoint. This is something that we at Imbibe help clients address and respond to on a daily basis. In terms of the not as good, there are obviously still many challenges. Customers are still poor at forecasting and put much of the burden on suppliers to handle all the limitations that we're talking about in terms of cost and lead time. Obviously, many product launches fail, and suppliers have to be careful about getting stuck with obsolete ingredients. Standard challenges of sourcing ingredients abroad remain. You have customs clearance, shipping time on the water. All of these things can add to your lead time and can threaten your product launch. And then in terms of the future, and what we see, we think the definition of clean label will continue to evolve and present new obstacles for suppliers and product developers. Transparency will increase, though, as it always does, and supply will ultimately catch up with demand, but it will take time. I look forward to working with my team and our clients to create new solutions for whatever comes our way. In the meantime, if you want to discuss your next clean label project, feel free to contact me at wlennon@imbibeinc.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for attending today. Hope it was helpful.